But Judaism does not emphasize victimhood. Rather, we focus on our endurance against all odds and our responsibilities to future generations. And it's for this reason that I thought your film, Labyrinth of Lies, would be a perfect film to show and discuss on this day. Giulio, we're honored to host you, an esteemed German director who has contributed your talents to true stories that are of great interest to the Jewish people, but perhaps of greater importance to non-Jewish audiences. So let me start by asking you to first just tell us about your background personally and professionally. What inspired you to work on this film, and why was this story especially compelling to you?
So first of all, I'm very glad to be able to talk to you, and I'm very honored that you choose my film for this day. Honored. I have an Italian father and a German mother, so my identity is very not conflicted, but when I'm in Germany, I'm treated as an Italian. When I'm in Italy, I'm treated as a German. And I was trained as a stage actor, did that many years, and started working also in film and television and producing. And I always had this dream to direct, and I had directed some shorts, and I was looking for a story to direct. And before I came upon this story, I could have never imagined to do anything closely related to the Holocaust, because I would have had too much respect for it. But then my producer came to me and she's like, there's this woman, Elisabeth Bartel, she has an idea. There's an article in the newspaper, and I read about the Auschwitz trials in '63 in Germany, and I was educated in Germany in a quite good school, and I had no idea. I definitely had no idea about the whole story. Before I started working on the movie, if you'd asked me, I'd said, yeah, the Holocaust happened, and then the German people basically immediately started, dealing with their past and started trying to make amends and everything. And the truth is that for almost 20 years, they did everything to cover it up, to forget it, to not talk about it. And if not for the heroism of these prosecutors and Fritz Bauer, it would have been forgotten. And the Auschwitz trial, there's actually, when I was in LA, I talked to a history professor. He wrote a book, The Forgotten Trials of the Holocaust. The 1963 trials were forgotten, and Fritz Bauer, who's now pretty present in the public discussion and in the public knowledge, he was forgotten. There's not, I think 5 years ago they named a little street after him, but there's no street, no square. Like, he doesn't have the place in post-war German history that he deserves. And when I realized that I didn't know that story, suddenly I realized, oh, this is worth telling. And so we started working on the script, and I said, if we get it to any place where somebody wants to produce it, I have to direct it. And the producer, when the main producer, when he saw the script, he really liked the script. And in our first meeting, he said, do you have to direct? And I said, yes, I have to direct. And then I directed it, basically.
Well, I want to tell you something maybe a little bit embarrassing, and I don't know if this is true for the rest of the audience, but as I told you before we got on together, I'm a child of survivors, and I have been pretty immersed in Shoah history, as has pretty much everyone who is, I'm sure, viewing this and sitting here today in this audience. And yet, I didn't know about these trials. And I'm wondering, how is it that most Jews who have, I don't even want to say have been educated about the Holocaust, we've been steeped in it, it's in our kishkas, as we say. How is it, of course, we know about the Eichmann trials, those were seminal, and a seminal point in our attitudes towards our transition, perhaps from victimhood to, another place. How is it, do you find that Jews are not familiar with Fritz Bauer and these trials and such?
Yeah, I mean, people who are historians, they know him, of course. The trial is actually the first time, to my knowledge, that a country put his own soldiers, so to speak, on trial for something they did following orders. Mm-hmm. Every country, as soon as you desert or you don't shoot it, then you will be put on trial. But it's today, if we We have that in Germany, and I know the Americans have it too. Like if something happens in Afghanistan or in a place of conflict that the military, that the government feels is not following the rules, people get put on trial. That's a totally new concept that has never been done in history before. So, and I don't know why. I have no answer to that question. I know that the Germans definitely forgot it and had, there was a writer wrote a very good book, The Second Shame. Like the first shame is what the actual Holocaust, the second shame is how long we tried to not talk about it, to cover it up. And I think that there's one thing that I also try to tell in the movie, that of course Germany was also destroyed. So like after the Second World War, there was hunger, people died from hunger. There was, everything was like, they were totally concentrated on survival. And even today, we live in a time where, and because I love to talk, so I have to say one thing first. To me, and I say that from the bottom of my heart, there's nothing compared. I never compare what happened to anything else. But for example, a lot of times you notice that it takes 20 years for things to come out. Like in every kind of, a lot of things, like I don't want to get into it, but a lot of things, it's never immediately that people start dealing with it. It's almost like if the shock is too great, like the organism needs a period of denial. And if you look at children, the denial in children happens when it would break the system. So if it's too much for a child, then it just goes into denial. It just blocks it out. And then, 30 years later in therapy, it finds out, oh, this and that happened. Because at the moment that it happened, it would have destroyed it if it had really actually felt it and worked through it.
So you are talking about, and the film depicts a German society in this post-war in the 1960s, we're talking 20 years later, that really, for the most part, wanted to forget, if not deny, the horrors of the past. And you speak about just now these trials as a turning point, kind of opening up the spigot, the faucet for starting to address the past. Can you tell us a little bit about what that dealing with the past looked like afterwards, and perhaps even if that's changed somewhat today in very recent times, now that only recently the vast majority of both the victims and the perpetrators are no longer with us? So what that post 60s period was like, and maybe take us to today if you think there's a change that's been going on.
Yeah, well, this point that a young prosecutor doesn't know what Auschwitz is, that was to me as a filmmaker the hardest thing, because I couldn't believe it myself. Like I really checked, and I talked to Gerhard Wiese, who was one of the young prosecutors. He told me exactly that. He had been interned by the Russians after the Second World War, and there was he recalls it. He says, "Oh, there were some newspaper clippings, but we said that is propaganda. That can't be true." And that is one thing that I realized, that one has to realize that the Nazis were masters of propaganda. So they were lying through their teeth. So afterwards, the people were used to authorities lying. That's part of what made it easy. And this young prosecutor, he then forgot about it. He went to law school. He never heard about Auschwitz. And when he became a young prosecutor, they actually gave him a little book about the memoirs of one of the commanders and said, read that and read what happened there. And we're talking the beginning of the 60s. So that is actually truth. There were, of course, people who knew and who tried to get it into the public eye, but the general public was in total denial. And Fritz Bauer was actually, and that to me, for example, you probably read about these trials that they have today. They put a secretary on trial who's like somebody working in the office or somebody working in the kitchen, like 94, 93. That's what Fritz Bauer, the district attorney, actually wanted. He said, let's define Auschwitz as a murder machine, and anybody who participates is guilty. But they wouldn't let him do that. So that's the absurdity, that they had to actually prove single acts, single crimes. And the Germans, by the way, crimes against humanity, they could have put that into their penal code, but they didn't. Mm-hmm. That would have made it easy. And that actually changed. And interestingly, if I wander too far off, please stop me. It changed with the 9/11 trials, because there were some students in Hamburg who helped the terrorists of 9/11. And so the German judicial system started to say, oh no, if you provide shelter, or if you pay, if you let them use your bank account, you are an accessory to murder. And that suddenly they realized, oh, but then we have to actually go back, because there's no statute of limitations to murder. Manslaughter, there's a statute of limitations. So, and murder in the German law is very specific. It has to be especially cruel, out of base for economic gain. Like there's certain definitions, and so that's changed, and that's why they basically now pull out these. I'd say pull out. They have suddenly these people who were, and they'd known these people. They knew what they had done, but now the thinking about about Auschwitz as a crime from a purely legal point of view has changed. So now they put them on trial and they actually convict them. But
separate from the kind of formal justice system and how that's evolved, I want to talk a little bit about, as we, the ordinary people, and not just the ordinary people who might have been perpetrators or bystanders during the war itself, but during this period in the 60s. So for example, and how ordinary Germans in the 60s, let's call it the 80s and 90s, and maybe today, if we can generalize, so, sociologically or societally, because one of the interesting characters, even though it was a minor character in the film, was actually the secretary, I'm forgetting her name, right? Because she was exposed to the stories, to the drama, to the, the trauma, not just the drama, to Rodman's dedication and commitment to prosecuting, but then his, giving up on it and coming back. And we saw, she was the, as we'd say in America, like Joe Everyman, just the ordinary person who was exposed to it. And she went through a journey also that we got to see, and actually was part of it till the very end, right? And I felt that she was taking in a lot and doing her own, I'm going to use a Hebrew word that are, cheshbon nefesh. Cheshbon nefesh is like a calculus of your own soul, taking inventory of your own soul. Who, how do I process, not even what's my responsibility, but how do I process this, information, and what does that mean? And so I guess putting aside the justice system, regular Germans and their cheshbon nefesh, how they're processing their role in German society. So we'll say 60s, they didn't even know Auschwitz existed or what it was, if we believe that. Yeah. And then 80s, we spoke before about the miniseries Holocaust in the 70s. So everyone, it was exploded, it's out there, no more denial. So how is German society then? And then I'm wondering, today, perpetrators are gone, victims are gone.
Well, many people came to me and they said, I always read the newspapers during that trial, and that was very formative for me. And these were people from the so-called 68 movement. That's like the generation before me, mm-hmm. who became very influential. Of course, they started running the country. And I think it was like a like a fire that was lit in 63. Then in 68, the youth movement really started, it became a wildfire. And it really became very much a conflict in every German home, because people who were young in 68, their parents were somehow involved in the Second World War, either being actually perpetrators or witnesses, or they didn't. The famous German question was, what did you do? How did you? I don't know how to translate it. And basically the youth in 68 confronting their parents, and the parents saying, a lot of them saying, we didn't know.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, because you just said it, well, how can you believe that it was known? One should not underestimate the power of denial, because denial is very powerful. People, I can tell you that I had a, and again, not making a comparison, but just to talk about the power of denial. A German director, I'm not going to name him, of course, came to me and he said, I was in the, and he had seen my film, and he was in a plane, and somebody next to him was reading an article about child abuse in a elite school that he went to, and he was 42, and he remembered at that moment that he was abused as a child, and he said, for 25 years I had no idea, it wasn't part of my inner, and then he remembered, and then it all came out. So basically in 68, that fire really raged in the confrontation between what many countries had, but in Germany it had that very special side that they said, like, what did you do? What did you do? What did the people, young people came to their parents and said, like, what did you do? What did you do during the Second World War? And then in the 70s, it started being taught at school. And as a German, I must say, I think Germany really is trying as good as they can to actually keep the memory alive and tell, for example, we didn't have any problem financing this film. It was funding from the state too. And today it's almost, and I don't agree with that argument, but there's a lot of people say, like, okay, somehow there's a feeling enough, not, we've talked about it, we've seen movies, we've done it, there's a German comedy where the teacher says, okay, we have a little excursion today, and one of the students says, oh, not another concentration camp, please, as a joke. So that is very much part of the discussion today. There's no, of course, there will be some crazy people who deny it, but basically the conflicts between people say we have to keep this alive, and that's something that we have, that's our responsibility. And people who basically say, like, enough, it happened, we did all that. And I think that's my personal opinion, because people confuse guilt and responsibility. And of course, if, like, I'm born in 65, I'm not guilty. I can't be, because guilt is something very specific. But I'm responsible. And that responsibility is keeping, and I'm a Catholic, I'm a strange person. I'm a Catholic, but I also have a Zen teacher, and my Zen teacher, he said a beautiful thing. He said, we are multi-generational beings. And the older I get, the more I have that feeling, like we are individuals, but we're also kind of like we're also our grandparents and our parents, and my children will be me and my wife and my parents. And it's kind of, we are, and I always make that example, like if hypothetically, if my father killed your father, I cannot meet you and say, hi, how, it's not me, it's just my father. No, we both instinctively, on a very personal level, it would be very much part of our interaction on a human level. We would feel that. And I would, if somebody, whatever somebody did to my parents, if I meet him, it will be part of our interaction. So I think today, and the people who are for keeping it alive are definitely, it's really part of the curriculum in the schools and everything. But interestingly, the Auschwitz trials that talk about how post-war Germany tried to deny it, that's not really taught in school. It's taught up to 45. And as I said, I had a totally wrong view of the 50s and 60s.
It was actually interesting to watch in the film some of the collaboration between the Israeli Mossad and the German justice system, and the challenges and the cooperation.
Yeah,
and
this is
actually,
these are facts.
right,
I mean,
Germany and Israel has been, look, Germany and Israel have been cooperating and working together on many things, really since the war ended, right? Almost immediately, and they're strong allies and partners and have been for a long time. But I think I don't want to speak for American Jews, but for a lot of American Jews, very far across the Atlantic, far from Europe and all that, Germany remains toxic, if you know what I'm saying. Like, it's been hard, or American Jews have not had that much exposure or interaction with Germans today, or even the kind of German that Rodman represents, which perhaps more Israelis do and have. And I know you mentioned to me your experience in Israel. So what do you think about that?
No, the Israelis love, but they really, a lot of Israelis come to Germany. A lot of them stay in Berlin. They come to Berlin. There's a lot of interaction. But there was one thing I wanted to mention, that also because you are an American audience, the American government had no interest in getting to the bottom of it. They had the Nuremberg trials, basically had their they had their trial, and then they wanted to be done with it. They started working with of course, Oppenheim famously on the atomic bomb. They put him over. They started using SS people in the Secret Service. There was they had like a couple of big industrialists in prison. And as soon as the Korea War started and they really said, okay, it's gonna be us against communism, they let them go because they said, we need a strong Germany. So they would have had the means to really get much further into the whole, but they had no interest. And yeah, I think I know the toxicity. Even so, I've been to the States a lot. I also meet a lot of people who don't have that at all. Also Jewish people who really separate, like somebody from my generation from the other generation. But I think the more I live or read or think about it, I think one can never underestimate what a huge impact the Holocaust had, not only on Germans but on the whole world. I think it was if you look at, your movie-going audience, if you look at Metropolis from Fritz Lang, what kind of hope and like before the First and Second World War, the kind of visions we had for humanity, and I think French existentialism couldn't have existed without the delusion of the Holocaust. The fact that, humans did this to other human beings. And I think that it's the biggest impact on, certainly on German culture, but I think on all of humanity in a way. That's my feeling, and I think it's not really conscious. But as I said, if you look at movies before the Second World War, the kind of optimism or the kind of belief in the rules and the kind of, these are almost gone. Everything is, contemporary culture has a huge amount of cynicism or also delusion or kind of ironic distance to everything. And I think that that's my feeling is that that's kind of the, and I'm an optimist, but that's the fall from grace. And it's kind of, you know, we have to rebuild to get back to a place of yeah, a positive view of ourselves.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but as I shared with you before, my mother passed away at the age of 99, a survivor. And one of the last things, lucid things she said, and what she always transmitted to us was life is good. She did not have a dark view of people or the world, even though she went through the darkest chapters. And if she can be as resilient and optimistic as she was, who am I to be, or, you know, to be any less? And, you know, with that, and Rodman was that, right? I mean, he looked at the darkness because he felt a responsibility to, and Fritz Bauer, of course, for a better society, a better Germany, not one that says, you know, we screwed up so badly, let's just end it all, right? It's, we have to rebuild and we can't give up. And I thank you so much, Giulio, for sharing this film with us, for sharing your time with us. And I know you have more work that you've given me some sneak previews that will be of interest to my community as well. So I thank you for investing your talents in stories that are important and worthwhile and beautifully told. So thank you.
I'm honored. Thank you very much for your time and for watching it on this day.
Thank you. From those of us here in the sanctuary, it was as if you were with us. And I know, speaking for myself, it was quite an amazing experience. And I'm so privileged that you shared it with us.
Thank you very much. Very kind.
Everyone here says the same.